Imagine a world where nearly all men vanish from the face of the earth in a blink of history. Not because of a plague or a natural disaster, but something far more chilling. A silent catastrophe that left no monuments, no written records, just an eerie gap in our family tree. Around 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, during the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, something unimaginable happened. Up to 90% of male lineages were erased from humanity's story. This isn't a myth or a legend. It's a fact, hidden deep in our DNA. Welcome to one of the most mysterious and haunting chapters of our past, a prehistoric event that reshaped who we are today. Let's dive into the story of how most men disappeared, why it happened, and why it still echoes in our lives now. To understand this staggering loss, we need to travel back 7,000 years. Picture a world on the edge of transformation. Humans were no longer just wandering hunters and gatherers, following the seasons for food. Life was changing fast. Small groups were settling down, planting crops and building homes. This was the tail end of the Neolithic era, the dawn of the Bronze Age, happening between 5000 and 3000 CE. Across Europe, the Near East, and Central Asia, people started crafting tools from copper instead of stone. They began mining, trading, and connecting over long distances, sometimes hundreds of miles. These early steps, as described in books like The Horse, The Wheel, and Language by David W. Anthony, from 2007, set the stage for huge cultural shifts. In the Near East, places like Uruk in Mesopotamia were becoming the first cities in history. Writing was just beginning, scratched into clay by early accountants. Studies from 2005 in journals like Current Anthropology show how quickly these societies grew complex. Meanwhile, the climate was changing too. After a long, warm, and stable period that helped farming take off, things started to cool and dry around 5000 CE. Rainfall patterns shifted, growing seasons shortened, and competition for good land heated up. Research from 28 in Quaternary Science reviews by Wanner and others points to these unstable weather patterns as a trigger for conflict. Farming had already spread across Europe from the Fertile Crescent through places like Anatolia and the Balkans. But settling down brought new challenges. For the first time, people had extra food, surplus. With surplus came inequality. Some had more, others less. This led to social classes, leaders, and inherited power. Life wasn't communal anymore like it was for early foragers. Instead, hierarchies formed, and with them, new ways to control and dominate others. The first clues of what this meant show up in bones. In Talheim, Germany, archaeologists found a mass grave from around 5000 CE. Dozens of bodies, men, women, children, were buried together. But they didn't die naturally. Their skulls were smashed, their limbs chopped. This wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. Nearby, at Schöneckillienstetten, another grave told the same grim story. People were killed with brutal force, some while kneeling, as if they were tied up or surrendering. A 2015 study in PNAs by Meyer and others called this a deliberate act of extermination. These weren't rare events. Similar sites in Austria at Asparnschletz, Herxheim, and other spots across Central Europe show the same pattern. Entire communities wiped out in planned attacks. Often, more men were killed, while women and children were missing, likely taken or absorbed by the attackers. This violence wasn't random. It stretched across continents, from Europe to the Central Asian steppes. Why did this happen? Societies weren't just trying to survive anymore. They were fighting for land, power, and a lasting name. When the stakes got higher, so did the bloodshed. This might be the first time in history we see something like total war, not just winning, but erasing the other side completely. Entire groups were slaughtered or taken over. Whole family lines vanished. And this wasn't just about hunger or lack of resources. It was built into the new power structures. Once land became something to own and pass down, control over territory, and who had children became everything. Archaeologist Christiansen, in works like a 2014 piece in Antiquity, notes that these early societies often revolved around male-dominated family lines and military strength. We also start seeing symbols of power: axes, decorations, fortified walls. Things that showed who was in charge, not just who could survive. With each generation, these symbols grew fancier, more exclusive. Some experts say this era marks the start of organized violence. Not just quick revenge killings, but cold, planned destruction on a large scale. If you weren't part of the winning group, you were disposable. Or worse, a threat to be eliminated. The stakes weren't just about stuff. They were about existence itself. And as we'll see, that's not just a figure of speech. It's written in our genes. Now, let's talk about the real proof, the genetic evidence. Over the last 20 years, scientists have used ancient DNA to map our past with incredible detail. What they found from around 5,000 years ago turned everything we thought about male ancestry upside down. Studies in journals like Nature and Genome Research reveal a shocking drop in Y chromosome diversity. Simply put, the genetic variety passed from fathers to sons almost disappeared during this time. Meanwhile, DNA from mothers, mitochondrial DNA, stayed pretty steady. A key 2015 study in Genome Research by Posnick and others called this a Y chromosome bottleneck and tied it to changes in society, not nature or disease. It wasn't that the number of men dropped, but their genetic diversity did. Most men alive back then left no descendants. Their family lines ended for good. Another 2015 study in Science by Carmen and others found that Y chromosome diversity fell by up to 90% between 5000 and 3000 BCE. In many parts of the world, especially Eurasia. This wasn't just a small local thing. It was global. So, what caused it? It can't be starvation or illness, because those don't target just men. Hunger kills everyone, usually in one area, and diseases don't pick based on gender, especially not back then. That leaves one answer. It was social. It was violent. It was on purpose. Antenor, a 2018 study in Nature Communications by Zheng and others offers a strong theory. As societies with strict male-led family groups rose, a few powerful men took over reproduction. Through war, conquest, and high status, some men had many children, while most others had none. The researchers say fierce competition between these male groups wiped out entire Y chromosome lines, leaving only a few dominant ones behind. This wasn't just random population changes. It was the result of violence and new social rules that valued control over land, women, and legacy. The scale of this change was huge. In many areas, just a handful of male lines came to rule the genetic map. For instance, a Y chromosome group called Ronbe spread across Western Europe, often linked to warrior cultures like the Yamnaya, and later the Bell Beaker people. In Central and South Asia, another group, Ronia, shows a similar story, tied to Indo-European languages and strict herding societies. What's even more striking is the difference between male and female DNA during this time. Women's genetic history shows much more continuity, meaning while men were disrupted by violence, women were often taken into the winning groups. This imbalance is a genetic clue to what likely happened: conquest, not just of land, but of family lines. This matches the archaeological finds of targeted violence against men. It's as if entire male populations were systematically replaced, not just through death in battle, but through a deeper kind of erasure. Unlike natural events that affect everyone, this bottleneck only hit male lines. It's a pattern almost unique to humans, driven by our own actions. Some even compare it to a cultural gene drive, where social rules push certain family lines to dominate while others fade away. Here, it wasn't just about strength or having kids. It was about who had power, who could lead, who got to be remembered. What we see in our DNA isn't just a bottleneck. It's a purge, a long-term, society-wide cut to half of humanity's family tree. And it changed our future in ways we're still figuring out. Not just in who we descend from, but in how power became part of society's very foundation. This genetic wipeout ties directly to the rise of patriarchy, not the kind we talk about today, but its raw, violent roots. Before this time, fights were small and local, often over hunting grounds or short-term resources. They were settled with quick raids or personal grudges. But once farming let some families build wealth. Land, animals, tools, stored food. Everything shifted. Violence wasn't just a reaction anymore. It became a plan. Welcome to the start of war. Male groups began fighting not just for stuff, but for control. Over who had kids, and whose name lived on. War became a way to expand land and erase rival family lines completely. This change also came with a new focus on status. Societies started to value warriors, where fighting skill meant influence, and the chance to have more children. Success in battle often meant more wives and kids, a pattern seen in some traditional cultures even today. Anthropologist Napoleon Shannon's work with the Yanomami people shows this. Men who fought and killed often had larger families, a hint of an ancient mindset. When one group beat another, they didn't just take loot, they destroyed. Across Europe and Central Asia, mass graves show mostly adult men, with women and children often missing, likely absorbed by the victors. Settlements were burned, replaced by new ones with different styles. This wasn't a one-time thing. It was a system. Women and children might join the winning side, a sad but common pattern in both human and animal history. Primatologist Richard Wrangham, in his 2019 book, The Goodness Paradox, notes that even chimpanzees show this. Males are killed, females taken. The logic is brutal but clear. For men, though, it was elimination. This wasn't a single massacre. It was a deep reshaping of society where winning male lines grew and losing ones disappeared. This created strict patriarchal systems where power passed through men, and loyalty to family groups became everything. These family groups didn't just guard their own. They enforced control within and attacked outside. Archaeological sites like fortified hilltops and burial mounds show setups centered on one powerful leader or warrior, buried with weapons, animals, or even other people as signs of dominance. Elite warriors, who could organize violence and protect wealth, became the key to their culture's future. Genetic studies of Yamnaya, corded ware and bell beaker burials, like those summarized in a 2015 Nature article by Hawk and others, show small groups of elite men replacing older male populations in just a few generations. Some of these lines became almost like dynasties. From Ireland to Kazakhstan, ancient remains suggest a single male line could dominate an entire region's descendants in a short time. A famous later example is the Genghis Khan effect, where one man's Y chromosome line appears in about 1 in 200 men today. But this pattern started way before recorded history. Even now, a few Y chromosome groups like Ronia, Ronbi, J2, and Onabanabe stand out as hugely successful, not just for moving around, but from conquest and systems that lifted a few while crushing the rest. Power back then wasn't just about politics or fighting. It was biological. Winning meant not just surviving, but having lots of children. Losing meant your name story, and genes were gone. This set the stage for thousands of years of male-dominated rule. Not just men in charge, but specific men, specific families. It's where ideas of nobility, war as a duty, and the need for a male heir began. Even today, though we don't have war bands, many power structures, like family wealth or political dynasties, still carry echoes of these ancient filters. This Y chromosome collapse also lines up with the rise of warrior societies. Around 3000 B, C, E. Across the Eurasian steppes and into Europe, a new way of life took hold, tying status, violence, and legacy together. The Yamnaya culture from the Pontic-Caspian steppe is a clear example. These mobile herders buried their dead in huge mounds called kurgans, not just as graves but as shows of power. Building these took teamwork and leadership, pointing to a society with strong rulers. Excavations detailed in a 2015 Nature study by Hawk and others uncovered graves with weapons, wagon parts, and sacrificed animals. These weren't just burials, they were statements. The men buried here weren't ordinary. They were symbols of control. Genetic proof shows they had far more descendants than others. In much of Europe, Yamnaya-linked male lines took over, replacing older ones in just a few generations. This wasn't just about having kids. It redefined power. Earlier societies focused on community and shared work, but the Yamnaya brought a hierarchy built on warrior status. Power was shown through horses, weapons, mobility, and how you were buried. Cemeteries were organized to show rank. Some men got copper axes and wagons, others nothing. Animal sacrifices and fancy graves may have even acted like early propaganda, showing a family's strength and favor from above. This wasn't unique to them. Later, groups like the Corded Ware and Bell Beaker built on this, with elite burials and inherited status. Over time, this system fed itself. Sons of leaders became leaders. Power ran through blood, creating a warrior class defined by visible signs of control, not just rules or rituals. Fortified towns, ceremonial weapons, and burial displays all kept this cycle of violence and hierarchy going. This setup lasted a long time, showing up later in places like Mycenaean Greece, Iron Age Europe, and early Rome. The idea that ruling came from conquest and passed through male lines was already set. These societies also shaped a new kind of masculinity, where a man's worth was tied to fighting. Born in the steppe mounds, this idea echoed through thousands of years. Even as weapons changed, the core stayed the same, glorifying warriors, honoring elite male lines, and believing in inherited power became central to politics for ages, right up to 19th century Europe, when democracy started to challenge it. Those ancient mounds weren't just graves. They were plans for the future. Interestingly, old myths seem to remember this violent shift, not as loss, but as beginnings. Take the Greek heroic age in Hesiod's works, a time of demigods fighting in wars like Thebes and Troy. These heroes, often born of gods and humans, lived stories of honor, anger, and early death, a cycle of male bravery and sacrifice. Yet under the glory, these tales are full of destruction, conquest, and the fall of whole peoples. Walter Burkert, in his 1972 book Homo Necans, suggests Greek myths and rituals are tied to sacrificial violence, echoing ancient male rights and real trauma. Norse sagas talk of endless clan fights, blood feuds, and Ragnarok, a final battle that destroys and rebuilds the world. Violence isn't just a backdrop. It's the driver of fate, marking the shift from one era to another. Across the globe, the Hindu epic Mahabharata tells of a massive war between related clans, the Pandavas and Kauravas, where almost all warriors die. The end isn't joy, but emptiness, a world without heroes. Still, the violence is seen as divine, needed for balance. Similar themes pop up in Irish epics, Mesopotamian tales, and Native American stories, where an old world is destroyed for a new one through blood. Mythologist Michael Witzel, in his 2012 book The Origins of the World's Mythologies, argues this pattern of a golden age broken by huge conflict reflects real historical collapses in population and society. These myths might be cultural memories, dramatized echoes of the real upheavals and violent bottlenecks that changed prehistoric life. But instead of grieving the loss, they frame it as heroism, turning systemic violence into sacred stories. That makes sense. The survivors, the winners, wrote these tales. These legends might have been more than stories. They could have reinforced the power of warrior elites, making their violence seem normal. Bruce Lincoln, in his 1986 book Myth, Cosmos, and Society, suggests Indo-European myths often justified conquest and male power, linking violence to divine will. If gods fought to create order, so could rulers. Myth became not just memory, but an excuse. A forgotten genocide turned into epic. So why does this matter now? Why should a 7,000-year-old event affect us? Simply, the systems born in that prehistoric chaos, patriarchy, organized violence, male-led inheritance, set the course for much of history. These weren't short-term changes. They became the foundation of institutions, beliefs, and norms. Our ideas of power, family, and gender roles trace back to that time. The warrior hierarchies of then became the framework for kings, empires, and even modern countries. David W. Anthony, in his 2007 book, shows how Indo-European expansion spread not just language, but a worldview of male lineage, status, and conquest as core to identity. These echoes linger today. Our legal systems, family names, and even how we see leadership carry traces of those ancient ways. They're just old. Understanding this history lets us question what we call human nature. Were we always violent, hierarchical, male-led? Or did specific conditions back then lock these patterns in? Yuval Harari, in his 2014 book *Sapiens*, says human nature is really a mix of cultural choices shaped by the stories we tell to explain how we've lived. Sometimes those stories hide the cost. The truth is, the genetic winners of the past weren't always the smartest, kindest, or most creative. Often they were just the most violent or lucky. That leaves a tough question. What did we lose in all that bloodshed? What ideas, art, languages, or ways of life vanished when whole family lines were erased? What other futures were cut off, not by accident, but by force? What if some of those lost paths offered something different? A life less about control and legacy, more about sharing and care? Anthropologist James C. Scott, in his 2017 book *Against the Grain*, shows early state building didn't just organize society. It crushed more equal, flexible ways of living. Rigid top-down power wasn't the only option. It was forced. Its legacy still shapes what we think society must be. Recognizing what was lost helps us see what we might still recover, not by idealizing the past, but by admitting it wasn't the only road. The systems we inherited aren't untouchable or eternal. They're just ancient. Once we see that, we can imagine new ways forward, not by turning back, but by refusing to stick to one path. So, when you hear survival of the fittest, remember that sometimes fittest just meant being in the right place, born to the right family. It didn't always mean wisdom, kindness, or even strength. Often, it just meant lasting long enough to tell the tale. We inherited a world shaped not by the best, but by what survived. The dominant stories, the winning names. Ideas of power pass through time like flames, lighting a road we didn't pick. We didn't ask for this legacy, but we can decide how to handle it. If this story made you see the past or present differently, subscribe, and share it with someone who'd care. Drop your thoughts below and check out our other dives into hidden history. Every click helps this echo travel further. Until next time, keep listening to the past.